Hello, everyone. Good evening. Let's give another round of applause for Kassandra and Ken Williams. Absolutely. 40 million souls since 1971, as Ken Williams told us, and got to see a lot of the images that are shown to us on a daily basis, thanks to Kassandra. With that said, my name is Jared Adams. I'm the founding president of the UCF ACLU student chapter. And I've been given the honor of introducing our third and final speaker for the evening, Laurence Vance. While I haven't had the opportunity to get to know Laurence personally, I can tell you that he's well-read. Author of 24 books, including The War on Drugs is a War on Freedom, and director of the Francis Wayland Institute, and 4 degrees, history, theology, accounting, and economics. And if we're going to be hearing from somebody who's going to bring together money, theology, and history all in the same place, I think it's worth a listen. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Laurence Vance, our final speaker for the evening.
Our perspective is going to be a little different than the first 2 speakers. I want to talk to you tonight about libertarianism and the war on drugs. I'm grateful for the invitation to speak tonight about a subject that I have continually written about for many years. And if you didn't pick up a copy, you can get a free copy of my book, The War on Drugs is a War on Freedom. We have some left out on the table. I want to thank each and every one of you students for coming to this program. I want to talk about one of the most senseless, wasteful, and destructive things that I can think of: the government's war on drugs. Which government? All of them, federal, state, and local. But primarily, I want to talk about the federal government. Let me begin by making 3 statements that might on the surface seem to be quite radical. Number 1, the war on drugs is a war on the free market, a free society, and freedom itself. Number 2, the war on drugs is a monstrous evil that has ruined more lives than drugs themselves. And number 3, all drugs, not just marijuana, should be perfectly legal. If you oppose drugs, you should oppose the war on drugs even more. If you consider drugs to be dangerous, you should consider the war on drugs to be even more dangerous. If you believe that drug use is destructive, you should believe that the war on drugs is even more destructive. If you think that using drugs is immoral, you should think that the war on drugs is even more immoral. If you think that abusing drugs is a sin, you should think that the war on drugs is a greater sin. Now, it is unfortunate that whenever I speak about the drug war, I have to begin by explaining that I don't say the things I do because I'm a pothead who feigns sickness to get access to medical marijuana, or a drug addict who just wants to be able to legally get high, or a businessman who seeks to gain financially from drug legalization. I have no agenda other than freedom. So, lest there be any misunderstanding, let me make myself perfectly clear. I neither use nor sell mind-altering, behavior-altering, or mood-altering substances, nor recommend that anyone else use them either. And not only do I not use or sell what are classified by the government as illegal drugs, I wouldn't use or sell them if they were legal, and would prefer that no one else do so either. I am even skeptical about the health benefits of most legal drugs, prescription or over-the-counter. Even though I consider the use of any drug for any reason other than because of a medical necessity to be dangerous, destructive, and immoral, I consider the government's war on drugs to be even more dangerous, destructive, and immoral. And even though I neither advocate nor condone the use of mind-altering, behavior-altering, or mood-altering substances, I don't think anyone should support the government's war on drugs any more than they should support the government's wars on obesity, cholesterol, trans fat, tobacco, salt, and liquids over 3.4 ounces on airplane flights. Okay, so now that you're certain that I don't want kids to use drugs, that I would rather air traffic controllers not smoke weed on their breaks, that I don't want school bus drivers to snort coke before their shift, and that I would prefer that Americans don't walk around all day stoned out of their mind, I can talk about libertarianism and the war on drugs. I want to first look at the drug war, then introduce you to libertarianism, and finally to tell you what libertarianism says about the drug war. Then I want to conclude by asking two important questions. First of all, the drug war. The war on drugs was officially announced by President Nixon in 1971. Speaking at a press conference at the White House, Nixon declared, "America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive." Nixon continued his military rhetoric in a special message to Congress on drug abuse prevention and control, calling for a full-scale attack on drug abuse on many fronts, to wage an effective war against heroin addiction. He called for a worldwide escalation in our existing programs for the control of narcotics traffic. Nixon also appointed the first drug czar and oversaw the establishment of the Drug Enforcement Agency, the dreaded DEA. Although the war on drugs was formally declared by Nixon, this doesn't mean that the federal government didn't fight against drugs and drug abuse for decades before Nixon's presidency. The federal government began introducing anti-narcotics laws in 1905. This means that there was a time in this country when all drugs were legal. Just like you were once free to have a garage sale without getting a permit from the government. But what about marijuana? Haven't 28 states and the District of Columbia legalized marijuana for medical use? Haven't some states decriminalized the possession of certain amounts of marijuana? Haven't 7 states legalized the recreational use of marijuana? All true. But there are 3 problems I should point out about these things. Number 1, it is only laws against marijuana that have been relaxed. You can still be locked in a cage for possessing other drugs. Number 2, the repeal of some marijuana laws is not marijuana freedom. There are still massive restrictions and regulations regarding marijuana in the states that have legalized it for medical or recreational use. Number 3, the federal government considers the growing, distributing, buying, selling, possessing, or smoking of marijuana to be a violation of federal law. Marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act, with a high potential for abuse and no acceptable medical use. Other Schedule I drugs include heroin and LSD. Schedule II drugs, which the federal government considers to be less dangerous than Schedule I drugs, include cocaine and fentanyl. So that's right, the federal government considers marijuana use to be worse than cocaine. So regardless of how some states have relaxed their marijuana laws, the federal war on drugs continues unabated and unquestioned. It enjoys wide bipartisan support in Congress. It is equally supported by both major political parties. It is backed by the majority of Americans. It is cheered by most religious people. It is espoused by most parents with children. It is championed by liberals and conservatives alike. It is encouraged by the majority of law enforcement personnel. It is even defended by those who say they abdicate the Constitution or civil liberties or limited government. The gross injustices and absurdities of the drug war are legion. Some Americans have been sentenced to life in prison for drug possession because it was their third drug offense. There are murderers and rapists who don't serve life in prison. Thanks to the war on drugs and civil asset forfeiture laws, police regularly practice policing for profit, whereby they confiscate cash from law-abiding Americans because having a large sum of money on you means that you must be a drug dealer or be involved in drug trafficking. And then there are the outrages that are generally not seen. Americans incarcerated for drug offenses who are raped, beaten, humiliated, suffer the loss of their jobs, their money, and their families. And drug warriors maintain that it is drug users who are immoral? I think they've got it backwards. In a nutshell, what is the war on drugs? It is simply government bureaucrats, nanny state do-gooders, puritanical busybodies, statist drug warriors, and assorted hypocrites telling you what you can and can't consume, swallow, smoke, sniff, snort, inject, or ingest, and locking you up in a cage if you possess, manufacture, buy, sell, distribute, transport, cultivate, or traffic in a substance the government doesn't approve of. Now let me talk about libertarianism. I'm a libertarian. I'm not a composite of a liberal and a conservative, as if there really is much difference in practice between the two. I lean neither to the left nor the right, but I am not a centrist or a moderate. I'm not a constitutionalist, although I wish the government would at least make some attempt to follow its own constitution. I am not a devotee of some alternative lifestyle, but I don't believe that my cultural conservatism is essential to libertarianism. So, what is libertarianism? Libertarianism has been defined as an ethical system that seeks to preserve the liberty of individuals and as a political philosophy concerned with the permissible use of force or violence. These are two sides of the same coin. The essence of libertarianism is liberty. Libertarianism is the philosophy which says that people should be free from government interference to live their lives any way they desire, pursue their own happiness, accumulate wealth, assess risk and make their own choices, engage in any economic activity for their profit, and spend the fruits of their labor as they see fit, as long as their actions are peaceful, their associations are voluntary, their interactions are consensual, and they don't violate the personal or property rights of others. Libertarianism respects personal privacy, financial privacy, free thought, individual responsibility, freedom of conscience, free exchange, free markets, and private property. Libertarianism celebrates individual liberty, personal freedom, peaceful activity, voluntary interaction, laissez-faire, free enterprise, free assembly, free association, free speech, and free expression, as long as they don't violate the personal or property rights of others. Libertarianism is not being socially liberal and economically conservative. It is not survival of the fittest. Libertarianism is not utopianism or selfishness or hedonism or licentiousness or materialism or nihilism or anarchy or pacifism or isolationism. Whether any of these things are right or wrong, moral or immoral, ethical or unethical, or good or bad is irrelevant. Libertarianism has nothing to do with anyone's lifestyle, tastes, vices, sex life, traditions, religion, aesthetics, or social attitudes. An individual libertarian might be a moral relativist, as might an individual liberal or conservative. But libertarianism as a political philosophy cannot be said to be immoral. No political ideology has a monopoly on vice, immorality, bad habits, or questionable behavior. The creed of libertarianism is non-aggression. Freedom from aggression and violence against person and property as long as one respects the person and property of others. The principle undergirding the libertarian philosophy is what is known as the non-aggression principle, or axiom. It is wrong to threaten or initiate violence against a person or his property without his permission. It is the non-consensual initiation of aggression against the person or property of others that is always wrong. Boxing and mixed martial arts are violent sports where the initiation of aggression against one's opponent is the whole purpose of the event. But the violence is consensual. By stepping in the ring, one fighter is granting the other fighter permission to use violence against him. The non-aggression principle is designed to prohibit someone from infringing upon the liberty of another. It is the core premise of the philosophy of libertarianism. Aggression is theft, fraud, the initiation of non-consensual violence, or the threat of non-consensual violence. Violence is only justified against violence. No violence may be used against a non-aggressor. Force is justified only in defense or retaliation, but is neither essential nor required. You can chase a burglar away instead of shooting him. Force is also proportional. You can't just kill someone because he walks across your lawn. Now, I don't know of anyone who wouldn't readily assent to the non-aggression principle until you bring government into the picture. Many people who say that they subscribe to the non-aggression principle on a personal level have no problem supporting government aggression. The major difference between libertarians and everyone else is that libertarians oppose and seek to limit the intervention, regulation, and control of government, which, after all, is the greatest violator of the non-aggression principle, personal liberty and property rights. This is why Voltaire could say, government at its best state is a necessary evil, and at its worst state is an intolerable one. If there's one thing aside from its simplicity that makes libertarianism the ideal political philosophy, it is its consistency. Libertarianism strictly applies the non-aggression principle and consistently applies to government actions the same standard. This is because libertarians consider the non-aggression principle to be both absolute in scope and universal in application. In a libertarian society, that is, a free society, the only possible legitimate functions of government are defense, judicial, and policing activities. But this does not require anything like the monolithic, authoritarian, intrusive nanny state that the U.S. federal and state governments have become. Henry David Thoreau said he agreed with the motto, that government is best which governs least. And libertarians would certainly agree with him. In a free society, the functions of government, in whatever form it might exist, would be limited to keeping the peace, providing a forum for dispute resolution, constraining those who would attempt to interfere with people's peaceful actions, and prosecuting and exacting restitution from those individuals who initiate violence against, commit fraud against, or violate the property rights of others. And the case has even been made that elements of these things could be handled by the private sector. In a free society, actions are only prohibited that involve the initiation of violence or aggression against person, like murder, rape, or property, like burglary, embezzlement, shoplifting, vandalism, arson, trespassing, or both, like armed robbery. Libertarians maintain that as long as people don't infringe upon the liberty of others by committing or threatening to commit acts of fraud, theft, aggression, or violence against their person or property, the government should just leave them alone. Why am I a libertarian? Unlike the typical liberal or conservative, I don't believe it is appropriate for the government to arrest, fine, imprison, or otherwise punish people for engaging in entirely private, peaceful, voluntary, and consensual actions that do not aggress against the person or property of others. I don't believe it's appropriate for government to regulate, oversee, and sometimes prohibit commercial activity between willing buyers and willing sellers. I don't believe it is appropriate for government to take people's resources against their will, by force if necessary, and transfer or redistribute them to other citizens or foreigners as the government sees fit. So, what do libertarians say about the drug war? Libertarians may have their disagreements, most of them minor or petty, but if there is one thing that libertarians are unanimous on, it is the tremendous evil that is the government's war on drugs. Not so, say liberals and conservatives, the drug war is necessary because drugs are addictive, they're unhealthy, they're dangerous, they are bad habits, and they are self-destructive. Yes, they are, says the libertarian. Drugs are addictive, like caffeine. They're unhealthy, like high fructose corn syrup. Drugs are dangerous, yeah, like snowboarding. Drugs are a bad habit, yeah, so's biting your fingernails. Drugs are self-destructive, yeah, like smoking cigarettes. So why are liberals and conservatives not adamant about the government sending people to prison for doing these things? Why just the drugs? But, continues the liberal and conservative, using drugs may lead to premature death. You mean like using alcohol, replies the libertarian? But using drugs may cause harm to your children. You mean like divorce? But using drugs has societal costs. You mean like obesity? But using drugs may lead to financial ruin. You mean like using credit cards can do the same thing? But using drugs may lead to crime. You mean like gambling can lead to crime? But using drugs may have unintended consequences. You mean like having casual sex? But using drugs may kill you. You mean like using prescription drugs can kill you? Regarding drug use, libertarians reason that it makes no sense for the government to wage war on illegal drugs when tobacco, alcohol, and prescription drugs kill far more people every year. Tobacco use costs the U.S. economy billions of dollars every year in medical costs and lost productivity, and causes hundreds of thousands of premature deaths every year from heart disease, stroke, cancer, and smoking-related diseases. Alcohol is also one of the leading causes of premature deaths in the United States. Alcohol abuse is a factor in many drownings, suicides, fires, violent crimes, child abuse, sex crimes, and accidents. More than 100,000 Americans die every year from drugs prescribed and administered by physicians. More than 2 million Americans a year have in-hospital adverse drug reactions. And hundreds of Americans die every year from reactions to aspirin and other pain relievers. Why doesn't the federal government declare war on aspirin? Two of the main reasons why libertarians have this attitude toward drug use is that in a free society, vices are not crimes, and people are free to live their lives any way they choose as long as their conduct is peaceful. First of all, in a free society, every crime would have a tangible and identifiable victim, not a potential or possible victim, and measurable damages. There would be no such thing as nebulous crimes against nature, society, or the state. Having bad habits, exercising poor judgment, engaging in dangerous activities, and committing vices are not crimes. Government attempts to protect people from these things always lead to greater evils. And second, in a free society, individuals, not government bureaucrats, are free to decide what risks they want to take and what behaviors they want to practice. Every individual is free to pursue happiness in his own way, even if his choices are deemed by others as harmful, unhealthy, unsafe, immoral, unwise, stupid, destructive, or irresponsible. What people do in the privacy of their own homes is their business as long as their actions don't infringe upon the rights of others. Libertarians are weary of pointing out the failures of the war on drugs. It has failed to prevent or reduce drug abuse, failed to keep drugs out of the hands of addicts, including prisoners, failed to keep drugs away from teenagers and children, failed to stop the violence associated with drug trafficking, and it's failed to have an impact on the availability of most drugs in the United States. But libertarians also acknowledge the successes of the war on drugs. It has succeeded in destroying personal and financial privacy, succeeded in destroying civil liberties, succeeded in clogging the judicial system with non-crimes, succeeded in turning America's inner cities into war zones, succeeded in unreasonably inconveniencing shopping, succeeded in destroying the black family, and succeeded in wasting billions of taxpayer dollars. But even if none of these things were true, libertarians would still be right in what they say about the drug war. For example, libertarians say the war on drugs has financial and human costs that far exceed any of its supposed benefits. Libertarians say that the war on drugs is an assault on individual liberty, personal freedom, and property rights. And libertarians also say that the war on drugs violates the Constitution, the principle of federalism, and increases the size and scope of government. It is on this last point that libertarians say that everyone ought to be standing with them when it comes to opposing the drug war. How could anyone who said he believed in the Constitution support the federal government's war on drugs? Does the Constitution authorize the national government to intrude itself into the personal eating, drinking, and smoking habits of Americans? Does the Constitution authorize the national government to prohibit the manufacture or sale of any drug? When progressives in and out of the government sought to prohibit alcohol after World War I, they knew they could only do so by amending the Constitution. That's why the 18th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted in 1919. Now, the libertarian position on the drug war may seem radical to some, and let me sum it up for you. Number one, there should be no laws at any level of government for any reason regarding the buying, selling, growing, possessing, transporting, manufacturing, advertising, using, or possessing of any drug for any reason. Number two, it is not the proper role of government to prohibit, regulate, restrict, or control what anyone desires to eat, drink, or smoke, or ingest into his mouth, nose, veins, or lungs. Number three, the war on drugs should and could be ended immediately and completely. All drug laws should be repealed. All nonviolent drug offenders should be pardoned and released from prison. And number four, there should be a free market in drugs without any government interference, regulation, taxing, or licensing. This is the libertarian position on the drug war. Now, in conclusion, I want to ask two questions. First question, who should decide what substances a legal adult puts into his mouth, nose, his lungs, or his veins? By supporting the war on drugs, you are saying that the government should decide. As the late economist Ludwig von Mises has well said, opium and morphine are certainly dangerous habit-forming drugs. But once the principle is admitted that it is the duty of government to protect the individual against his own foolishness, no serious objection can be advanced against further encroachments. If it is the business of government to tell us what we can't put in our bodies, then what can't the government tell us? Second question, whose job is it to keep kids from using drugs? By supporting the war on drugs, you are saying that it is the government's job. But if it is the job of government to keep kids safe from drugs, why is it not likewise the job of government to keep kids safe from violent video games, or internet porn, or risque movies, or filthy music, or raunchy novels? Or perhaps keeping kids safe from these things is the job of parents with the help of churches, friends, and family. If you are going to defend the evil that is the government's drug war in the name of protecting the children, then you can raise no rational objection and make no logical argument against the government doing anything in the name of protecting the children. Now let me close with this. True freedom includes the freedom to engage in wrong, immoral, sinful, unhealthy, or stupid behavior. Use medical marijuana, or simply get stoned out of your mind, as long as you don't violate the personal or property rights of others, and that you assume responsibility for the consequences of your actions. The war on drugs is ultimately not a political issue, or a social issue, or an economic issue, or a cultural issue. The war on drugs is a freedom issue. The war on drugs is a war on freedom. Legalize freedom, legalize drugs. Thank you.